I'd say the key lesson for me has really been an evolution over my career. And to just cut to the bottom line, I fundamentally believe that influence has really two key dimensions that are important for me and how I lead and important for the work that I lead at the foundation. Number one is that it has to be reciprocity. Influence has to be both ways. You have to authentically listen and be open to being influenced as much as you are trying to influence in a specific direction that drives, outcomes. The second one is that influence, from my perspective, is how do you influence directly, but then how do you determine when it's better to empower others to influence and to carry the critical messages?
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I am thrilled to introduce today's guest, Allan Golston. Allan is the president of the United States program at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He leads the foundation's efforts to advance educational opportunity and student achievement in the United States to ensure that all students, and particularly low-income students and students of color, receive a high-quality education that leads to success in college and their careers. Allan has a very long bio, but here are three things I think you should know about him before we dive into the interview. Number one, he oversees the Gates Foundation's major areas of investment in the U.S. in education and economic opportunity, and is passionate about helping this country achieve equitable academic and economic outcomes for everyone. Allan sees education as a bridge to opportunity unlike any other in America, and his efforts focus on equity and education, making math a gateway to success for all students, and using data to get better student outcomes. We're going to talk a lot about data today. Number two, Allan's work at the foundation spans more than 2 decades. He originally joined in 2000 as the chief financial officer and began serving as U.S. president in 2006. Allan felt a deep connection to the U.S. programs, education work from early learning to post-secondary success, and he's committed to working with partners to ensure that all students get the support they need to create the futures they want. Number three, Allan brings to the Gates Foundation his experience in consulting, public accounting, consumer packaged goods, software development, finance, healthcare, and education. He also serves on the corporate boards of Stryker, a global leader in medical technologies, and Harley-Davidson. Allan, you have been called many things, from 40 under 40 early in your career to an Aspen Institute Henry Crown Fellow, board member for several notable organizations, including the Robert Wood Johnson Commission to Build a Healthier America, CFO, and of course, now president of U.S. programs for the Gates Foundation. Today, we are thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome.
Thank you, Anthony. I really appreciate it. It's just a real pleasure to be here today. And thank you for having me. I'm looking very much forward to our conversation.
Well, I am too. This is going to be really valuable for our community who looks to different leaders to learn about their style of influence. And I thought I'd start, obviously, who doesn't know the Gates Foundation? Your mission is to create a world where every person has the opportunity to live a healthy, productive life. And the U.S. program that you lead works to ensure everyone in the U.S. can learn, grow, and get ahead, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, or family income. So I have to ask, when you were studying accounting in undergrad, did you ever think you'd be doing this work?
It's such a good question. And the answer is, no, I didn't. There wasn't really any one moment where I knew I'd be doing this work. And in many ways, I didn't even really know that this work existed. I wasn't familiar at all with the world of philanthropy at that time. But I would say it's a collection of stories and experiences, and my own personal story that has influenced both who I am and the capabilities that I have that I believe, prepared me to do this work at this particular time in my career. And that story is really rooted in how I grew up and the experiences of my parents and what experiences and stories kind of influenced them. And, I think at the core of it is that I was born into a single parent household. It was my mom and me. My mom and my adopted dad, who married her a couple of years later when I was roughly 3 years old, both came from families where they were insecure financially. There wasn't a lot. They didn't have everything that they needed to thrive. And certainly education was not part of their household when they were growing up. But my mom and my dad, which I witnessed and experienced, both put themselves through school. My mom worked 2 jobs, putting herself through nursing school. My dad was a postman and did a second job remodeling houses, putting himself through school. So education was so central. And that was such a fundamental path to their ability to get financial security, the skills and knowledge that they needed to have agency and really to thrive as a family and to navigate the social and economic ladder. And that was really instilled in us, my brothers and me. And so it was so fundamental to me that the experiences, the work, the things that I didn't understand, the things that I did understand really shaped and influenced me, I believe, in a direction that both prepared me to do this work and recognized with a reasonable degree of both curiosity, humility, and a little dose of confidence that this was something that I could really make a difference in.
Wow. I mean, when I hear you share that sort of personal story, it makes me think it must influence your philosophy leading the U.S. program for the foundation, because obviously there's so much that we can do, inside of schools, for example, with education. But your own example, talking about in the home and that inspiration that you got from your parents, thinking about how do we reach people, how do we reach young people, not just when they're in a classroom. So has that influenced your philosophy of how you lead and the type of funding that you all provide?
Well, we primarily work through systems like public schools or job systems and structures, because that is where the leverage and where the opportunity is to have a really outsized impact with the very limited role that philanthropy can have. We cannot be the only source of a solution to the unbelievable challenges and opportunities that we're trying to kind of solve. We have to partner with governments, we have to partner with the private sector, we have to partner with the social sector. And so because we work with systems, we think about it through how do you support our schools, the incredible investment that this country makes in public schools and public higher ed institutions and early childhood learning centers to really, really make a difference. And at the same time, the context of what those systems exist, the schools, the local community that it exists in, the city and the context that a district exists in, it does cause us to partner with that outside infrastructure that supports schools and supports institutions. And sometimes we do directly partner with them and fund them. So it's really this blend of how do you form the right partnerships and how do you not only look to influence those partnerships, but also how do you look to be influenced by those partnerships so that it is truly a reciprocal partnership where you have a common set of objectives and working together with your collective power and strength to drive impact. But our primary aim is to ensure equitable outcomes in the systems that we're focused on, but measured in human level outcomes. So you have to be able to look across that spectrum of partnerships and systems and context and communities in order to be successful and really make progress.
Yeah, I mean, as you talk about that and the systems that we have, which obviously kind of there are layers of them and all of the partnerships, it takes a lot of influence to show up that way, to improve the lives of millions of people, which is what the foundation does. And I wonder if you could talk about how you think about the importance of influence in your role as president.
Yeah, well, it's incredibly important. And I'd say the key lesson for me has really been an evolution over my career. And to to just cut to the bottom line, I fundamentally believe that influence has really two key dimensions that are important for me and how I lead and important for the work that I lead at the foundation. Number one is that it has to be reciprocity. Influence has to be both ways. You have to authentically listen and be open to being influenced as much as you are trying to influence in a specific direction that drives, outcomes. The second one is that influence, from my perspective, is how do you influence directly, but then how do you determine when it's better to empower others to influence and to carry the critical messages? And that's really also fundamental to our work. And, as we get more into the conversation, I'll give you some examples of how we think about that and how I approach that specifically.
Yeah. I love those two pillars. I'm excited to dive into them a bit more. Um, Maybe one way we can kind of move in that direction is I'd love to hear how your relationship with influence and your own personal brand
Yeah.
has evolved, because you mentioned that evolution over your career. And I know, you started in public accounting and consulting, and that is perhaps different in a lot of ways than the world of philanthropy and education systems.
Yeah. So, I would say it's been a long evolution over my career from influence as a persona, which is kind of how I started in my professional trajectory, to influence as an authentic leader. And what I mean by that is, as you mentioned, I started in the corporate sector, really in public accounting. And I remember this very distinctively, that the persona and what you projected was really important in that corporate setting and with the clients that we worked in. For example, it ranged from you generally wore white shirts and a tie. And when you were outside of our office, you kept your jacket on. And it was important to project that persona because it instilled confidence in our clients. It showed that we were, had the capabilities and expertise to deliver on our commitments to our clients. And so I was almost imprinted with that idea that influence was about a persona. And as I had varied experiences over my career, I began to appreciate, both through my own experience, but also with colleagues and leaders that I worked with and worked for, that it's really authenticity from my perspective and view that is the most important kind of higher order influence. And it is about being who you are. And I realized that trying to influence with personas was just taking too much work. And it actually wasn't working really. It worked early in my career, but as I had more responsibility in different settings and contexts, it really wasn't an effective strategy. But what was effective, both in terms of just where you spend your time and energy, but also the impact and effective influence, was just being able to show up authentically and to say, I'm going to just be who I am. And I'm going to influence you and be influenced by my authenticity. And I'm going to offer that to you. And my ask is that you influence me through your authenticity. And to me, that was the sweet spot for me personally and in my professional career. And it's how I have defined my leadership and how I hold myself accountable. And, I fundamentally believe that, again, through a series of experiences, experiments, lessons, and learnings that have really influenced my leadership practice.
Yeah, I wonder if some of those same companies are shifting some of their norms.
I think that that's true.
Yeah.
And I have colleagues who work in some of those same settings and who've risen up in leadership. And it's great because they've evolved. And when you evolve, organizations and systems and structures evolve. And it is the tone at the top that really matters. It's not the only ingredient that drives culture and a kind of constructive, inclusive environment, but it certainly does matter.
You mentioned authenticity, which I think is so important when it comes to influence. When some folks hear authenticity, they may think, Oh, that's like an extrovert thing, like, kind of wearing your heart on your sleeve and telling everybody what you think and being out in that way. And I wonder kind of what your reaction is to that.
Yeah, well, I certainly don't consider myself um, really extroverted. Um, I love spending time thinking about things. I love reading books. I get a lot of energy from small dinner parties than large dinner parties. So all of those things are not always what motivates others. But what what I do know is that authenticity, regardless of where you draw your energy and where you like to spend your time, is really, really important. And what I've learned to do a much better job of is to tell stories because if I go to my natural place, I would spend more time with the numbers. I'm very much influenced by numbers and data. That's where I look first when I'm looking for information. And not everyone's influenced that way. But when you combine that, for example, with stories and uh, a bridge that allows me to connect with you, not as a statistic only or a set of data points, but at a more human connection level. That's what I mean by authenticity as well, which is I can both be true to who I am, which is I love thinking about things, I love reading books, I love digging into data and information like that, that is much more objective. And I can combine that with other tools and resources that also influence me, like your story and my story, and how do our stories overlap, and how did you grow up? And what are you wrestling with? And what inspires you today? And to share that with you and with the audience, in essence, that is what I mean by being authentic or
Yeah.
being authentic.
Yeah, and I think that's such a powerful lesson to hear from you, Alan, because people might assume someone in your role and who has such a broad reach that you would be very extroverted and really get energy from that reach. But I think what I'm taking away from what you're saying is there's the potential to have that reach and have that engagement and have massive influence. And in today's environment, you can do that in a variety of different ways through storytelling and through technology that we'll get into. And it doesn't require you to be a natural extrovert. So if somebody says, well, I'm not extroverted enough to be influential,
Yeah.
I think you're telling us, no, that actually, you don't have to be.
Yeah, because you can find other sources of motivation that are true to you. So I'm very motivated by how that reach can have equitable impact in the world. Others can be motivated by that reach about how they engage in that platform and very public ways or other mechanisms. So there are a number of entry points to say if we're trying to reach a goal of equitable impact where everyone who navigates our education systems or our job market systems can get the knowledge and the skills that they need to thrive, then you can authentically leverage that to drive impact and partnership with others in a number of different ways.
Yeah, I love that. So kind of to continue that, today, I just don't think it's possible for folks to keep their personal brand and their professional brand
Yeah.
separate in the way that they maybe used to be able to do, as you described, sort of the uniform that people used to wear that was maybe extended even, kind of in all facets from them professionally. And then their personal brand was just a totally separate thing. So I wonder that gray area of personal and professional, what has that meant for you and how you show up as a leader?
Well, it means that I pay much more attention to sharing my story and answering much more authentically that in my early days as a leader were really not the norm, and to seek other people's stories. And, to not start with, hey, how is our work doing? Are we progressing? But to start with, hey, tell me how you're doing and tell me how it's going with your mom. I know your mom was wrestling with some health issues, and to share that I've had parents from time to time or have parents who are wrestling with it. And here's what I learned and what did you learn? And it's that kind of connection where you are authentically showing up. I share when the world weight is weighing on me. I share when I'm excited and inspired and motivated. And I seek that information from others and work to create a, a culture and a work environment where that sharing is valued and people can feel both seen and to create a space where we can all see each other. So in many ways, organizations start with saying, hey, we need your skills to help us achieve our objective, whether that's in government or the social sector or the private sector. But what I believe, and I know a number of organizations do well, is to get the best out of someone's skills, which are so fundamental to an organization's success. It's also fundamental to an organization's success that people can kind of integrate who they really are. And that means being really authentic to themselves and being in that space where both the personal side of all of us and the professional side of all of us can coexist and to be welcomed and to be really celebrated. So, my leadership practice, I really work. It is a practice, not a destination to really do better at that today than I did yesterday, as preparation of being better tomorrow than I was today.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. And it goes back to what you said about storytelling, right? Leading by example, the best place to start is with your own stories and the personal side that you can share. And I wanted to ask, when you lead an organization that's investing in systems change, you obviously have to measure the outcomes of your work. And you mentioned, your love of data and doing that. But to get other people on board, to get partners on board, you do have to connect with them on a personal level. And I wanted to dive in a little deeper to what you were talking about, storytelling, about how do you balance that, the speaking to the head and the numbers and the logic with the speaking to the heart and the storytelling?
Yeah, well, a number of different ways. I mentioned that, one of my kind of core lessons around influence is knowing and discerning when is it better for me to do that and when is it better to support others to do that. And today was a really good example. I mentioned we're in a week at the foundation that we have annually where everyone comes to Seattle across our global offices. And it's a week of connecting to each other, connecting to the stories and how each other are doing, connecting to our progress and our vision and our values. And today in the division and the group that I run, we had an all staff. So roughly 200 people in the same room for a few hours, really celebrating. And one of the ways that I love kind of bringing in that head and the heart was having our partners tell their story. And so that we get to not only understand them as a human, but also understand our work through their work and our partnership through their work. And for them, not for me to tell their story, but for them to tell their story. And today we had a very special guest, a college president, who just came in and for really 2 hours told his story, what shaped him. He grew up in Puerto Rico and what shaped him and how he was raised and what were his hopes and dreams and what were his disappointments. He told a story about his own family. He told a story about him being an empty nester recently and how, challenging that was and how he and his wife got a puppy, the third of 3 dogs, in order to be able to kind of have comfort, but also very proud of their children for being on this journey of education. But he also told the story of what he accomplished. And I mean, he is delivering impact measured in human level outcomes for hundreds of thousands of students over the trajectory of his career. And he talked about what was hard about that. What were the setbacks? He is, of course, leading a college campus. And he talked about what it's been like over the past few weeks with the protests and the encampments and how he approached it and what his lessons learned are. So that is to me one of the most powerful forms of influence, when instead of me saying I met with him and I had dinner with him and here's what I learned, to say he is here and to engage him and to create a space where not only he can tell his story, but my colleagues get to ask him questions so that they can connect their own stories and perspectives to his. And to me, that just strengthens our partnership. It strengthens our ability to be influenced by our partners. It strengthens our ability to influence our partners. But to the point of your question, it was a home run in influencing my colleagues working together at the foundation just to reconnect with our vision and to just double down on our commitment that we've made to these very same stakeholders to have impact.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. Oh, that is such a powerful example. And I think, a leader in any environment with any number of team members can take away a lesson from that, Allan, to say, okay, I'm trying to get that influence across to this group. I want to show them the impact of the work we're doing. Well, who's benefiting from it? And can we ask them to tell that story from their point of view? Maybe it's a client testimonial, maybe it's a student perspective, maybe, depending on, again, the environment you're in. And I just love that example. And I can tell from the way you described it, it was really energizing, both for you as well as for the team members that you brought.
It was. And what I loved about it was there's a lesson for us because we are far removed from the stakeholders that we're trying to reach, the students, the workers, the families. And this leader and his institution are right there. And sometimes we don't recognize how some of our actions, all in the spirit of partnership and goodwill and good intent, can land in many ways the opposite of as we intended. And so, how we talk about the work, how we design and develop ideas. And he was able to convey with his lived experience some of the strengths of the work and approach that we do, but also some of the lessons learned that we need to consider as we continue our partnership and work together, not just with this organization, but with others. So, it's this lesson where, again, I could have said, hey, in just learning from our partners, here's some things that I think we can do better. But to have people hear that from him was incredible. And the imprint of those lessons were immediate. So I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to be able to do that, but also the lesson of leadership in my own practice about how important that is to really think about, is it me or someone else that's going to be the best influencer?
Well, and it reinforces also, you have to start at the center with influence, right? If you can't build champions on your own team, it's going to be, hard, if not impossible, to do it outside of the organization. And so getting that energy at the center is really a great step that we sometimes forget to do.
Yeah. Very true. Very, very true.
So, sometimes we're lucky enough to be able to get our whole audience in one room at one time, like this example. But obviously, in today's environment, we have such a fractured media environment. In the office, of course, we have hybrid, we have remote, we are in a global environment. I'd love to hear how you approach that. I mean, that's probably been true for most of your time as president, but has continued to accelerate, I would guess, over the last couple of decades. And I'd love to hear what you've learned and kind of, obviously it's a journey we're all going through right now, about getting the message out in a fractured and digital and global landscape.
Yeah, I have a real kind of real-time example that is, both a story of challenge, but also a bit of how to turn a challenge into a kind of a positive trajectory. I mean, there's no question that the kind of fracturing of platforms and influence kind of delivery vehicles, as I call them, create a challenge. I think it's not only the fragmentation, but it's that they're ever evolving, and some of the assumptions that you would have made even a year ago have really fundamentally evolved. And, I think both my lesson is, stay focused, know your audiences. And really, I learned to lean into the lessons of when do we tell the story at the foundation and when do I tell the story and when do we really invest in the capacity of others. So a real example is, you know, as most college age, as most parents of college age students know, students for the past several months have been involved in not only applying for financial aid, as well as choosing their colleges and considering what their post-secondary experience is going to be. And a part of that for really millions of students is filling out this financial aid application at the federal level. And there's been this long arc of trying to simplify the FAFSA form and make it much more user-friendly to parents, and that has really gone well. But some of the most recent changes to simplify it, the rollout has been a challenge, and it's been in the news. And, there have been, efforts to fix it in a certain amount of time, but then that fix discovered or unleashed new challenges and revealed new challenges. This financial aid can make the difference not only of where you go, but it can make the difference of whether or not you go. And to influence more accelerated action, a collection of partners in the ecosystem came together. We have commented about how important it is to fill out the FAFSA and for students not to give up and to find these resources for support. So those are examples where using my voice and the voice of the foundation has been important. But to really get on the ground to students and counselors and others, we worked with one of our partners in support of their capacity. The acronym's called NCAN. It's the National College Attainment Network. And what was powerful is they were much more effective at reaching the audiences. We knew our audiences. We knew we were not going to be able to reach them in a time frame because this is where minutes count and seconds count. You don't have months and months. Time is truly not on the side of, college selection, financial aid, and those types of opportunities and the related challenges there. So that's an example where we blended. Where do we have a role in influence and where do we invest in the partners like NCAN to have the influence? And it's really mattered. They've drove a Go FAFSA, a campaign. It's reached really hundreds and hundreds of professionals, and those professionals are much closer to the hundreds and hundreds of communities and the thousands and thousands of students and families in those communities that need that information about how to navigate this challenge.
I love that example. I think it's such a great reminder. What I'm hearing from you in this fractured environment is really double down on who is my audience, and who is the trusted messenger who is going to influence that audience toward action. And sometimes it's you, sometimes it's not you, but you want to build that capacity. But in this case, you kind of have to act fast. And you had partners that you already had relationships with, one in particular in this case, that already had those relationships that you could work with and invest in so that they could get that out. And I think that's a really good lesson for all of us, no matter what field that we work in, really asking those tough questions. Okay, who is that audience? Let's make sure we understand who they are. And then what are the best ways to get in front of them? And it may be us, but it may not be us. And so we might need to go make some new friends if we don't have them in place yet, if we want to achieve our vision. And I bet, I can only imagine over the time that you've been in this role, you've probably forged a lot of new partnerships and made a lot of new friends to achieve the goals that you have set out for the U.S. program.
The core that you mentioned, Anthony, which is so fundamental, is trusted relationships. And trust means I can tell you the truth and you can tell me the truth. And I know that we can have the needed conversations on our joint goal for impact. And that is really important for an organization like the Gates Foundation and for me personally, where we're in a funder grantee relationship, which has its own hierarchical structures and dynamics that could be really barriers if you don't have that trusted relationship. And where partners can say, hey, I know you've equipped us with this messaging and you are investing in our capacity to reach those audiences because we have trust, but that isn't going to resonate. It resonates with you, Gates Foundation or Allan, but it's not going to resonate with our audiences. And to have the trust and the partnership where those types of conversations, like what's going to actually work, not what we want to work or what we thought was going to work, but what's going to actually work. And to be able to have that trust to build on each other's ideas, to push on each other's ideas, and particularly our partners to be able to influence us in a very trusted way really makes all the difference. And we are not perfect at that, but we work really, really hard to be really, really good at it. And our relationship and partnership with NCAN is one of those examples, exactly how you described it.
And just is coming through so clearly as a theme from the very beginning of this conversation to where we are right now, the importance of the two-way relationship to build trust. It's essential. We have to tell one another the truth, and to be able to influence, you have to allow the other to influence you. And you've given a couple examples of that already. I wonder if there's anything more that you would say about the power of influence and that sort of two-way relationship that you've brought up a couple times.
Yeah, well, I would say that the primary digital channel that I prefer and resonates with me most is LinkedIn, and for a number of reasons around audience. And my colleagues will tell you and support the statement that I've had an evolving relationship with these social media platforms of like, oh my God, that's another thing I have to respond to. I have email, I have all sorts of other things to really both figuring out how to integrate it into my practice in authentic ways, but also to leverage it as another way to not only be influenced, but also to influence. And LinkedIn has been just really great because, it's an example for me personally where it was important to me to find a way to have a two-way exchange as much as you can. You can't do it entirely, but to say, okay, I'm doing these posts and my colleagues and I'm incorporating stories and I'm working to be authentic, but I also see that people are responding or are asking me questions. And how do I honor that someone's taking the time to read the post and comment on it, or even ask something like a direct message? And how do I honor that? And that's important to me just in terms of my leadership practice, regardless of the media. And so I've been on this journey to figure out how I do that and how I have that reciprocity. And I had an example recently that really struck me as why this was so important to me. And it's really related to this idea that parents are really wrestling with their families and students are wrestling with their families about how to make these choices and how to afford a college education and where to go. And after one of the posts I did, a mother in Texas reached out to me with a very thoughtful message saying, I have a really talented student. We always knew he was going to go to college. He is very interested in these fields. And I'm really trying to figure it out. Do you go in state? But that's not necessarily where he wants to go. But where he wants to go has a lot of implications, including financial implications. And she laid out this very thoughtful message, both just giving me the background of her personal story, but also in many ways asking for advice and at some level help. And the reason that exchange was important is one of the most important decisions that influences a post-secondary outcome successfully or not is what's called matching. Does the student match well, choose an institution that is well matched to not only their interests, but how they learn, the community they need in order to be successful and to thrive? And in many cases, when students aren't successful, it's not because they can't do the academic work, it's because the matching didn't work. And if they're matched in another setting, they can soar and thrive. But if they're matched in a setting that's misaligned, they don't succeed oftentimes. So this is a really consequential decision. And I responded to her because I do try to take the time to read all of the kind of responses, the direct messages, try to sort out the kind of blast emails or prompts that come in my inbox. And it's quite a bit of volume. But I saw that and I took the time to respond. And it influenced me to ask the question, okay, how are we in this ecosystem getting information out to families and individuals? And do we think that that's the best that we could possibly do? So I looked for where we and our partners do it. I asked a couple of colleagues in and outside of the foundation that I had an opportunity to connect with. And it was just really an important lesson about how the reciprocity of influence is really important. And while it's hard to do it on a digital platform, if you have a lot of volume, it isn't impossible. And that my instincts of wanting that a more reciprocal influence relationship, at least for my own leadership practice and the work that I do, seems to be the right instinct. So that's just another example of how I think about it. And, you know, that example will always stick with me because that's what we're about, having impact measured at human level outcomes. And that's an example, outcome at a time. That's how you get impact. And if you can aggregate that into systems level change, you can really have a really significant impact in the world.
Well, I absolutely love that you shared that example with us, Allan. Thank you, because you talked about how LinkedIn is a powerful tool, not just to broadcast your point of view and thought leadership out to a community, which is, obviously one of the things it's great for, but that you can use it to allow others to influence you and reach you. And I think it might be even surprising for some people to hear that. They might think, well, somebody in these really big jobs or LinkedIn, are they even logging in? Are they even involved with it? Because, you do sometimes wonder if they've just handed off the keys and they're not doing anything. And, obviously, busy leaders have to get help with it. But what I'm hearing from you is you're using that yourself as well to keep a finger on the pulse of what's going on. Is that right?
It is. I want to be really clear. I get a lot of help. So, and I have amazing colleagues that help me with that. So, and I do take the time. And, I initially struggled because when am I going to do this? And as I got more comfortable with the tool, it became clear to me that even 15 minutes on it, I'm not going to get to all of them, but I can at least invest what I can to honor that reciprocal relationship. And I really am making it more and more of a habit. And in many ways, because of that investment of time, the quality of the exchanges where there are real exchanges and dialogues are stronger. Like people that I met at a conference or a convening or a panel that I was on, or someone I met on a trip at the airport where we exchanged LinkedIn profiles. That exchange really is quality, whether it's personal or professional. So for me, I'm not suggesting this is going to work for every context, but for my context, my leadership practice, and the role that I want to play in influence and impact, this is what I need to do, and I'm happy to do it.
Well, I love that you shared that with us. And I have to say, by the way, with the specific example you shared about parents looking for resources, I know one of the projects that you all support is the college ranking from the Washington Monthly. And I always think that that's a really cool ranking when it comes out, because it's not just ranking schools by how many, how expensive it is or how big their endowment is, but it's looking at, preparing young people to be good citizens. And so, that might, but probably one of the resources that would really be helpful to that.
Exactly, one of the resources, because that is what really hundreds of thousands of students and families want to know, is that information, and to try to create spaces where they can get that information easily is really important to me, and it's important to the work that we do at the Gates Foundation. Yeah, so thank you for acknowledging it.
The liberal arts college in Missouri that I went to, William Jewell College, has gotten some great recognition on there. So as an alum, I'm always happy to see that and see that it's a different way of telling the story for people who are making what is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, decisions of their life for them and maybe for their whole family. So it certainly portrays it in that way. And you kind of hit on this a little bit, but I just want to ask you, in case you have anything to add, like, okay, great, you're using this tool yourself, but how do you make the time? Because a lot of leaders say, oh, I'd love to do that. I just don't have the time. And obviously you've decided that logging on to LinkedIn, even for 15 minutes, it's a big enough priority that you do make the time. And I wonder if there's anything you could share, maybe lessons for other busy leaders that are feeling a little like peer pressure of, I better do this too. But how does Allan make the time?
Yeah, well, it started with me not being in the mindset of all or nothing. And I'm very goal oriented. People know about me and have, high standards of performance for myself and the work that we do. And I went into it as I have to answer all of them or I'm failing and not succeeding. And I got to now get it right the next time. And I kind of moved away from that to both hold those standards, but also to have, I'll just say, grace for myself. And I think when I came to that kind of next step in my perspective on how to tackle this, I learned to say, okay, well, think about the choices and the habits. So, instead of when you're in a taxi to the airport, just looking at just news, read the news and maybe take 10 minutes to go on LinkedIn and see what's happening. And oftentimes there's something that I feel like I need to respond to, and then I take the time to do it. And I don't get through all of them in that 10-minute time frame or 25-minute time frame, but it's progress. And so I just learned to kind of fit it in and to just include it in kind of the menu set of things that I go through as I kind of go about my day or go about my, weekend or go about my commute time. And that's working for me. It may not work a year from now, and then I'll figure out what adaptations I need to make.
Well, I really love that. And I like how you sort of coupled it with the news, right? Because you might look at headlines that's usually kind of a one-way interaction and see what's going on in the world. But, a lot of times it's actually maybe even more relevant and important for us to know what's going on with the people and the organizations that we're connected with. And not only can you get that information and find that valuable for, knowing that as intel, but then you have the opportunity to make it a two-way interaction because you can say congratulations or you can comment or you can do something with it. And so I think for a lot of leaders, if they sort of put it in that news bucket and think of it as an extension of that, that might really help them think about where to fit this in.
I completely agree. And, I think what you've described is this emergent next stage of evolution for me, because the exchange with the mother from Texas that I mentioned earlier, that really was an information source. Like, that was an important information source for me. And if I, make this next shift, and it's an influence platform that's reciprocal, but it's also can be an information source, I think it really does help imprint those habits. Think of it differently than a platform that I have to engage with or something else I have to do.
Right. And one of our other chief influencers, and I'll give him credit for the CEO of the Arthritis Foundation, Steve Taylor, he said for him, it's kind of like the digital water cooler, that it sort of
Yeah.
plays a role that the water cooler used to play in his office that doesn't as much anymore. And so
I love that idea. I love it.
It's a great, wish I could take credit for it, but it's a great.
Yeah, no,
that
is really a great.
Well, just to close, I just wanted to ask you, where you find inspiration outside of your day job that impacts how you show up and influence others. And I wondered going through your bio, and I thought, he's on the board of Harley Davidson. Maybe he's riding a Harley on the open road and learning through that. I don't know, but where are you getting inspiration outside of the work that you do at the foundation?
Well, a number of sources. I always tell this story. One of the many incredible highlights of the privilege of working and leading at the Gates Foundation was being able to meet and interact with John Lewis, an incredible civil rights activist who has done incredible things for advancing progress and equitable outcomes in this country, both through his work in government, but also through his work just across the perspectives and ways to drive progress. And, what I was struck by was how personable he was. And, someone who was busy, this was more than 10 years ago, he literally took the time and we had a very thoughtful conversation about opportunities to have further impact through education. And so just not only being able to meet with him, but interact with him just continues to stay with me. And I carry that experience with me. And I draw on it really as a source of inspiration, truly. I have a picture of him and me in my office here. I also do love outdoors. And particularly what stands out for me is skiing. And I do ride motorcycles. And there is such a sense of freedom for that and of renewal and rejuvenation. And to be connected to the earth in that way and to have the freedom of exploration, whether it's on ski slopes or on roads in this great country, is a real source of inspiration. Those are two of them, but I also love reading. I love time with my family and friends. I love to cook. So I try to find a number of ways, because there aren't always times that I can, fit all those things in, but I really do get inspiration from a number of sources. Thank you for asking, because it's important that we do continue to renew ourselves and to be inspired to continue to be, effective leaders.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad that you have so many. And I obviously, John Lewis, what an influencer. I mean, of influencers, right? So that's amazing that you had that personal experience. I'm so grateful that you spent time with us today. I think the themes that came through were really powerful. But in particular, this idea that the reciprocal nature of influence and trust, I think, was really the core theme that pulled through for me. And I think it's really important for us to hear even such an influential and powerful organization and such a great leader like you, that not just showing up with the answers and the investments, but that two-way nature of influence and building those trusted relationships. I think that's a really powerful lesson for all of us. And even hearing an anecdote about how that happened on LinkedIn with you was really powerful for me. So Allan Golston, President of U.S. Program at the Gates Foundation, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. And I wish you a good rest of the week. Take good care.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.